Life can get hectic when you start a family, but which can help you make confident decisions from improving your home to financial planning. We'll make sure you're prepared. Whether you're looking to reduce your household bills, seeking advice around your child's health, or want to find our best buys for your new home, Which has got you covered. Use our expert advice to make the right choices for you and your growing family by visiting which.co.uk/growing family. That's where you'll find everything you need to make confident decisions and have peace of mind that all the advice you're getting is 100% independent. So to find out more, just head to which.co.uk/growing family.
Hello and welcome to the Which Money Shorts podcast. I'm Lucia Ariano, host of the Which Money podcast, here to bring you a taste of some of the best money advice taken straight from the Which Money magazine. Did you know that fraud is the most common crime in England? Well, in this week's episode, we're going to look at how the experiences of victims of fraud can help us identify and avoid risks. This article was originally written by Chiara Cavalieri. It sometimes feels as though you can't answer your phone, browse the internet, or send a message these days without having to dodge fraudsters impersonating your bank, your favourite retailers, or even your loved ones. This threat isn't just imaginary. You're more likely to become a victim of fraud than any other crime in the UK. Yet the number of prosecutions and police resources dedicated to fraud remains shamefully low. Admittedly, it isn't a fair fight, as many of the sectors that inadvertently open their doors to fraudsters still operate in a responsibility vacuum, while perpetrators forge new and improved strategies. Our latest survey of more than 1,000 fraud victims shows that nothing has changed since we ran the same survey in 2022. It's clear that the public continues to bear the brunt of a disjointed approach to prevention. In April 2024, we surveyed 1,012 people who had lost money to fraud in the past 2 years. We also conducted a nationally representative survey of 2,003 UK adults. In our survey, 61% of victims said at least one app or website was involved, with Facebook, Google and WhatsApp by far the most frequently named companies. The same top three identified in our 2022 survey. Those who were initially targeted online were far more likely to say this happened on social media than via search engines and dating apps. Yet only 12% reported the fraud to the relevant website or app, mainly because they didn't know this was an option or gave up halfway through. Of those few who did report it, 42% said they found the process difficult, compared with 15% of those reporting to their banks, and only 40% were satisfied with the speed of response. This was 75% for banks. 18% said they didn't receive any advice or resources from the online platforms after submitting a report, while 20% didn't hear back at all. Victims commonly told us they felt ignored, that these firms weren't interested and didn't take any notice. Others said that they found the reporting process complicated and not very easy to understand, or felt they were given short, unhelpful and unsatisfactory advice. Fraudsters can be intimidatingly convincing online, hiding behind false identities and blending technology to their will. Experts warn that artificial intelligence has made it even easier for them to slip through unnoticed by eliminating the tells such as poor spelling and grammar and generating slick images, videos and even audio clips to trick us. In our survey, victims were more likely to say they aren't confident they could spot cloned websites and fake adverts on social media or search engines than any other scams, including fake text messages, fake emails, and doorstep scams. More concerning still is that online platforms are often profiting from scams. Which has repeatedly found blatant examples of fraudulent advertising on popular search engines and social media networks. Some reappear even after we've reported them. It's hard to believe that there's still no regulatory incentive for the likes of Google and Meta to tackle fraud, just a voluntary agreement between the government and the technology sector to reduce fraud on their platforms. It's unclear what impact this has had since it launched at the end of 2023. The introduction of the Online Safety Act 2023 should mark a more significant turning point in the fight against fraud. It will eventually mean that online platforms could be fined up to £18 million or 10% of their global revenue, whichever is greater if they fail to stamp out scams and other harmful content on their platforms. The first set of rules from Ofcom, the regulator responsible for enforcing this legislation, should be in place at the end of this year, although final codes and guidance related to fraudulent advertising aren't expected to be published until the end of 2025. So for now, these platforms are best treated like the Wild West. Make sure you keep your wits about you. In our survey, 54% of fraud victims had their details used by a fraudster, for example, to make unauthorised purchases or open accounts in their names. These unauthorised payments should be refunded in nearly all cases, but 41% of victims said that they were tricked into sending money to a fraudster and therefore face a lottery to get their money back. To address this imbalance, from the 7th of October 2022, banks and other payment providers will have to refund victims of authorised push payment or APP fraud in all but exceptional cases. The new scheme will apply to more than 1,500 firms offering faster payments who will split the cost of reimbursement 50-50. The existing voluntary scheme covers just 10 banks and building societies. We found that 42% of victims of APP fraud said that they sent payments to a UK bank account, which would be covered by the new scheme, unlike those who authorised payments to fraudsters via cryptocurrency exchanges, digital wallets such as Apple Pay or PayPal, foreign bank accounts, gift cards, or foreign exchange platforms. If you use a credit card to send money to a scammer, you may be able to rely on Section 75 of the Consumer Credit Act for breach of contract or misrepresentation. However, there is no legal safety net when you use a debit card, only weaker schemes such as chargeback or PayPal's buyer protection. Other methods have no protection at all, which wants minimum legal rights for authorised fraud reimbursement no matter how you pay. But for now, it's safest to stick to credit cards wherever possible. You should also ask the Financial Ombudsman Service or FOS to step in if your bank refuses to refund you. Disappointingly, 32% of victims we surveyed said they didn't make a complaint to the FOS because they hadn't heard of it, the same proportion as our 2022 survey. 63% of victims informed their banks, but only 19% reported their experience to action fraud and only 16% to the police. 10% of victims told us that they didn't notify any relevant authorities, with men more likely to say this than women. When we asked victims why, they said that they felt the amount was too small or they were too embarrassed to report it to their banks. 26% weren't even aware they could report it to action fraud or didn't know how to do this, despite it being the National Reporting Centre for Fraud and Cybercrime in England, Northern Ireland and Wales. Even when fraud victims do attempt to share their experiences, they face barriers. In our survey, they were most likely to struggle reporting to receiving banks, meaning those that have let criminals open new accounts or control accounts belonging to existing customers. Fraud reports are also spread thinly across many organisations, most of which don't share intelligence with each other, so crooks can hop from one to another. Even when financial losses are relatively small, mental health often suffers in the aftermath of fraud. Indeed, more victims reported that their experiences had a negative impact on the levels of stress and mental health than their financial situation. Many spoke of their subsequent trust issues or said that they still feel angry, both at the fraudsters and themselves. One told us they learned a painful lesson and now trust very few people, while another said that the deception made them feel stupid and ashamed, so it was hard to tell anyone. These negative feelings can linger long after the experience. Financial firms should take action to identify and safeguard vulnerable customers. It's particularly worrying then that victims who had been professionally diagnosed with a mental health problem at the time of the fraud were less likely to get all their money back than those with no diagnosis and more likely to struggle to pay their bills or borrow money afterwards. Those with existing mental health issues were also twice as likely to say they didn't tell their banks about the fraud because they previously had a bad experience doing so, and they didn't report to action fraud because they felt too embarrassed or too overwhelmed. Financial firms are just one part in a much wider battle against fraud. That's why we're calling for the government to make fraud a national priority by appointing a fraud minister and establishing a cross-sector task force to share intelligence. Plugging the gaps in protection means telecoms providers and domain registrars need to step up too. We've recently highlighted the extent of copycat bank websites in the UK, yet the companies selling these websites to fraudsters are often left out of the wider debate. Phone operators have been expected to follow tougher Ofcom rules since May 2023, predominantly to encourage them to run due diligence checks on businesses to whom they allocate numbers. But more ambitious plans to use something called calling line identification authentication to detect and block calls from spoof numbers more comprehensively has since been dropped. Some 50% of fraud victims who were defrauded after receiving fake phone calls or texts told us it involved number spoofing, where the caller ID is used to impersonate a genuine company. Ofcom's plans may be revisited in the future, but for now, you simply can't trust that any unsolicited caller is who they say they are. Thank you to Chiara Cavalieri for that original article, first published in Which Money magazine's August edition. If you want to subscribe and get the magazine delivered directly to your door, click the link in the description of today's show. For even more expert money advice, subscribe to our free newsletter and remember to tune in to our weekly money podcast with new episodes every Friday. This episode was produced and edited by Romana Yassin. Thank you for listening and goodbye.
Are you thinking about the future and how to protect your loved ones? Creating a will is one of the most important steps you can take to ensure your wishes are carried out and your family is taken care of. That's why we're excited to tell you about a very special offer from Which Wills. Which Wills offers a straightforward, affordable and trusted service for writing your will. Whether you need a simple will or something more complex, our expert team is here to help you every step of the way. With Which Wills, you get access to legal professionals who can answer your questions on a one-to-one basis, customizable options to suit your specific needs and circumstances, and peace of mind knowing that your will is legally sound and your wishes will be respected. You can start the process from the comfort of your own home. Just visit whichwills.which.co.uk/premium-30 to get started. That's whichwills.which.co.uk/premium-30. And if you purchase before the 30th of September, you will get 30% off Which's premium will service. Don't put it off any longer. Secure your family's future today.